So thoughts in this particular schema refer specifically to thinking linguistically or in language. So what are you when you are not thinking, when you are not putting words together in your mind, when you are not imagining things? You should have a generalized body awareness, and you will feel attention become very light and move around very easily. Almost like there is no gravity to the attention. If this can be your experience, try to maintain a general awareness of the body. That can be the breathing, as it runs through the center of the body, or it can be just the body as a whole. You need to have attention grounded in the physical body and the present moment. So then explore, see how that feels, see what happens when thinking starts to arise. Do you know what the thought is before you've thought it? At what point does it turn from being a general idea into a line of language, of words? What happens if you stop the words halfway through? What happens to the thought? Try to watch it all the way until it's dead and it's gone. And you can just feel what's called a fragrancing or a lingering knowledge of what that thought was. Paying attention to thoughts gives insight into impermanence. When thoughts arise, they feel like they are permanent, they are important, and they are real. But when you watch thoughts cease, then you get the insight into impermanence of mind. This thought that seemed so believable a second ago now has disappeared. Watching the impermanence and uncontrollability of thinking gives you insight into non-self. You see the mind working by its own mechanism, by its own karma, while you are watching. As you experience the thoughts then as impermanent, unstable, not yourself, not under your control, you get nibbida, or disillusionment. Thoughts start to appear as unpleasant, as dukkha, as something that shakes the mind, distracts attention. So this is the three insights, the three poisons: impermanence, non-self, and dukkha, as applied to the rising and falling of the thinking. So we're going to sit together for another few minutes. And for the last few minutes, turn your attention to the idea of metta, of loving kindness, the universal well-wishing for all world beings. Any way you can find to arouse this state of mind is okay. You may use the words, may people be free from suffering, free from harm. May all beings be free from suffering, free from harm. Or you can use visualization. You can imagine the people that you love or even pets to arouse that feeling. You concentrate on the feeling itself, that warm brightness offering out to the whole world. This is Sobana Citta, beautiful mind. We practice these beautiful states of mind so that they are easy to arouse. They're quick to arouse. They're easy to remember. So we take this time to deliberately call into mind this beautiful mind state, Sobana Citta, metta, loving kindness for all world beings, unconditionally. Sabbe Buddha Balat Patta Pache Kanancha Yang Balang Arahanta Nancha Tejena Rakang Bandami Sabbaso Sabba Buddha Nubawena Satta Soti Bhawantute Sabbe Buddha Balat Patta Pache Kanancha Yang Balang Arahanta Nancha Tejena Rakang Bandami Sabbaso Sabba Dhamma Nubawena Satta Soti Bhawantute Sabbe Buddha Balapata Pache Kanancha Yang Balang Arahanta Nancha Tejena Rakang Bandami Sabba So Sabba Sangha Nubawena Satta Soti Bhawantute. Okay, so relax your posture. Okay, so the topic this week, this time, is I called Not Thinking Inside the Box, because normally you are told to think outside the box. So this was my little pun on the joke. And being inside the box is bringing yourself back into like the pressure cooker of meditation. Normally, our perception, our consciousness works by imagining ourselves as a small player, like an avatar, wandering around in the world, interacting with people. But if you are practicing mindfulness, if you are practicing Dharma well, the attention should come back from things of the world and start to focus on you yourself. So you're not so interested in what things are outside and around you. You're not so interested in what people are saying to you. You're not so interested in what kind of food you get to eat. You are more interested in your own reactions to those sensory inputs. When you do this, the understanding or vision should start to change. This is the path of insight meditation. Should start to change. So you are less interested in what somebody is saying to you and more interested in your reactions to them. Are you reacting with interest, with greed, are you rolling your eyes? Are you hoping that the person goes away? Are you impatient? your attention should be turning inwards and seeing how you are acting, rather than being out to the people or the circumstance. Now, don't worry, you'll still be able to talk to people. You can still drive your car. You can still do what you need to do. Just there is almost like breaking the fourth wall, if there are any actors here. You know, when the people are on a stage and they're acting in front of you, but in the room on the stage, there's three walls, the far, the left, and the right wall, but the fourth wall is missing. So the audience is like it's looking in to the room. Now, if an actor turns around from the people on the stage and addresses the audience directly, this is called breaking the fourth wall. And it can be quite jarring because you're caught up and involved in the story on the stage. You're not supposed to be feeling yourself or noticing the audience around you, or the person in front who's scratching their head, or the person behind who's eating sweeties and opening sweetie wrappers. This kind of jarringness where suddenly you're aware of another component, this is what we are trying to get to in insight meditation, that suddenly you're not just aware of the things in the world, but you are aware of yourself while you're acting in the world. And it should show you all kinds of interesting things about you. For example, so many people that you find yourself being impatient with. You're saying to yourself in your mind, will they shut up? Will they go away? So many people in the world, you really want their attention. You can feel this little lurch in your stomach, usually in your psyche, that says, I really want the attention of this person, or I like this person, or I want them to give me a pay rise, or whatever it is. So you see your reactions rather than what's happening around you. I noticed this some time ago. I was in a almost car accident, and the car behind us lost their temper over something. I don't know what it was. I didn't observe our car doing anything wrong. But he jerked his car around in front of our car, overtook us quickly and jammed on his brakes in the middle of the road. And we had to brake hard. And he jumps out of his car and he starts screaming and shouting through our window. I was quite pleased to say the person who was driving the car that I was in kept his cool. He just didn't look at the person. He kept his hands on the steering wheel and he didn't do anything. And after a couple of minutes, this road rage guy kind of let stream a few final expletives and then left. Now, if you put yourself into the mind of the road rage guy, he must have felt that he was cut off or that we should have let him in or something, and explode with anger because he doesn't like that thing. If you are practicing mindfulness, you will notice your reactions. You'll notice how anger takes over your heart and your soul. You'll notice how that anger is getting you into trouble. If you're driving the car and you are an insight meditator, you will notice the fear come up, or the indignant, righteous indignance that I didn't do anything wrong, and the feeling like you want to argue back or maybe convince the person you didn't do something wrong. So to an insight meditator, this is the way that our vision should start to change. You should become aware of yourself interacting with the world rather than just being aware in the world around you. As you do this, you'll notice your thoughts coming up and going away, and your reactions to the thoughts and the feelings behind the thoughts. Now, in Buddhism, usually in the texts, it's very clear that thoughts have to be put away. There may be good thoughts and bad thoughts, kusala, akusala, but both of them, the good and the bad, need to be put away for meditation. However, there's two questions to that. One is many modern day teachers tell you, don't try to control your thoughts, just observe them and be aware of them, or let them be where they are. There's another question that comes up that I've been thinking about the last few days. I watched this attack on Israel with Hamas and Palestine, and I saw some of the videos and some of the really harrowing stuff. And the question has to arise, is letting go of thoughts just turning away from things like this? Do we have to act in the world? Should we be reading, feeling, reacting? Should we be thinking? Should we be writing essays or blogs or signs and going out and demonstrating? It can seem like, it can feel like that the practice as a Buddhist is something like sticking your head in the sand and pretending these things in the world don't exist. And this is something that I've been thinking about, and I would be interested in your viewpoints on this too, because quite honestly, I haven't fully formed my own opinion about this. How and to what extent should one become involved in the world? And can you react in a way that's constructive, but still have metta, still have kindness? Are you then forced to take sides in an argument? All of these questions are rather difficult, and quite honestly, I don't have a formula for navigating or deciding, and how much you want to get involved in the world and in these things is up to you. I would say that you don't, when we talk about putting aside thoughts in meditation, this doesn't mean constantly or permanently. This means while you are doing your sitting meditation, while you're doing formal sitting meditation, at this time, you take time to experience the mind free from thinking, hopefully. That doesn't mean to say that in the world you don't think and you don't act. I have a friend of mine who's a social justice warrior and likes to go out and fight the good causes in the world. I'm not much of a social justice warrior myself. I do remember a story. I think Stephen Smith told this story. I'm not quite sure who the protagonist was, but someone asked their teacher that they'd been in a tuk-tuk in India and they'd been kind of attacked by some people either trying to get their money or trying to get their attention or sell them something, and they've been not attacked, harassed by someone. And so they asked the teacher, well, do I just sit there passive and be mindful? And the teacher said, no, you take your umbrella and you beat that person over the head with all the metta you can muster. So I quite liked that. I've noticed amongst my Indian friends that they're very much like this, and also Sri Lanka. It's only really Westerners that try and hang on to the teachings and apply in the wrong way. Some years, many years ago, 30 years ago, I was in a monastery in New Zealand, and some local bad people had figured out that every evening the monks come down to chanting, and it's the ideal opportunity for the people to go up into the hillside where the monks' kutis are and steal stuff. So the monks were asking the question, is it attachment if I lock my door? Am I just being attached to my stuff? I'm a Buddhist, I should be practicing non-attachment, so I should leave my door open. And it's really only Westerners who think like this. I've asked a number of Asian and Thai and Sri Lankans, and they say, no, you go and defend your stuff. You put a lock on your door. Like it's obvious. Are you stupid? In fact, my Sri Lankan friends were even more vigorous. They said, no, you form a posse and you wait up on the hillside for the people to come up, and then you jump on them, and then you give them a beating and drag them off to the police station. They're quite a lot more militant in Sri Lanka. The monks are very much more practical. But it raises the question, if we are putting aside thoughts and thinking, are you just turning away from the world? Are you ignoring the problems in the world and the things that need to be addressed, the things that need to be thought about? And I honestly don't have a terrific answer to that. So I'm interested in what you guys think about it. I do know that for meditation itself, when you sit down and do formal meditation, then we need to bring the thoughts to a stop. The practice of insight into thinking, has a purpose, and that is to see the end of attachment to thinking during the meditation. So if I have seen, and I've been with many teachers who say, allow the thoughts to be there, allow them to wander through. And if you just allow your thoughts to be around in your mind, you sit there thinking. You're sitting there thinking, and you will not develop the higher states of mind and the deeper insights. The purpose of watching thoughts is to see them specifically in a new way. For normal people, a thought occurs to you and you think it's real. You see somebody, you like them or you dislike them, you believe that thought. They are good, they are bad. To an insight meditator, you will see your thought come up, judging, grabbing hold of, trying to spark a line of thinking, which we call bhava or becoming. And you catch it. And you catch it knowing that the thought really is empty. It's nearly always going to be some kind of judgment, good or bad. It's going to be a judgment. The key insight that comes up then is thoughts no longer are me thinking something, but rather something that's afflicting me. Something that comes in, tries to grab my attention, tries to move me, tries to shake me, tries to make me forget about my meditation. If you see the thoughts in this way, they appear as non-self. And this is a very common experience and misunderstanding with many meditators, especially who are beginners. Because when they sit to do meditation, they come back and they say, oh, I have so many thoughts in my mind, I can't stop it. But this is exactly how they were normally anyway. You always have lots of thoughts in your mind and you can't stop it. What's changed is you've broken the fourth wall. You have a new perspective to stand back and witness the thoughts. And when you witness thoughts in that way, what happens is you start to see the thoughts as oppressive. They're something that are coming to bother you, something to shake you, cause you dukkha, rather than being you yourself and your own opinion. This can give you a lot of insight and power. If you really know that your thoughts aren't real, your thoughts aren't true, and your thoughts aren't your own, you get this tremendous ability to dismiss them if they aren't beneficial. Unwholesome thoughts can arise, and you're like, no, I'm not going to follow that. I don't believe it. I found this in all kinds of circumstances. Like, for example, I used to spend a lot of time in taxis. I was doing a lot of traveling and teaching, and the Bangkok traffic is notorious. You can spend 40 minutes at one set of traffic lights. So I decided to use that time to read books. But when I was in a car, the second I start reading, I feel sick. And so I would say to myself, I can't do it. I feel sick. and I catch the thought. Do I need to believe that thought? That thought's limiting me and stopping me from doing what I want to do. So I changed my mind. I'm not going to believe that thought. Lots of people can read in cars and not feel sick. And bit by bit, I actually trained myself. As soon as this feeling sick started to come up, I would catch it very, very, very early on. And I'd wait until it disappeared. And I can now read in cars for as long as I can read for an hour in a car without any problem. I trained myself out of it. All the time, these thoughts come up. I can do this. I can't do that. I must do that. Or worrying about what people think of you. Somebody criticizes you online. Have you had this? You make a post or something on Facebook and somebody disagrees or they say something and it sticks in your mind and it plays over and over and over in the mind. We call this scripting. Well, you can catch yourself. If you know the ways of thought, you can catch yourself. As the thought comes up, this person, they're so arrogant, or they're wrong, or they've misunderstood me, and you catch it. And it's okay. So if they're arrogant, that's their problem. If they've misunderstood me, why do I have a need to be understood? What is the feeling that's hitting me before all the thoughts start to go in my mind of the clever, smart, and devastating reply that I'm going to give to them on Facebook? And then you find that actually what they said doesn't matter so much because you aren't believing your thoughts, right? It's not that you've gained some new insight into them. It doesn't really matter what they're saying or thinking. Your attention should be on yourself. You don't believe your thoughts. That gives you a tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of freedom. All the things that you thought you liked and thought that you disliked, you now realize it's just a thought, it's just a reaction. I notice this a lot as a monk because a lot of our choices are stripped away from us, especially with things like food. And we're always getting food that we don't like and not getting the food that we do like. And the mind can really attach to it very easily. And I had a newer person who was really attached to their food and they liked Coca-Cola, but they hated Pepsi. Now, I don't believe it. I don't believe that you can like Coca-Cola and hate Pepsi. You might prefer Coca-Cola. I think I prefer Coca-Cola to Pepsi. But when they were offered Pepsi, they went, like this. I don't believe it. This is a thought in the mind. This is a reaction. You're looking outwards at the object. You've told yourself, I don't like this. Now, when you're presented with it, you get this reaction to it. So it really pays to be careful with your thinking, to have practiced this insight into the non-self nature of thinking, to be willing to sit through meditation while the thinking appears oppressive. That's insight into the dukkha of thinking. That is insight into the impermanent nature of thinking. And it gives you the power then to decide what you are going to think and not think. It gives you the power to react in a positive way or a useful way, a skillful way, rather than an unskillful way. You are no longer chased around by your thoughts. So that's the reason why many teachers will tell you, be aware of thinking. And they're right. You allow the thought to be there. You get insight into it. But I want to make clear that insight is for two levels of change that should occur to you. One is your behavior should start to change, your reactions to things in the world, because you can choose patience, kindness, metta. But the second thing is you should start to become aware of your mind without thinking. Become aware of consciousness when consciousness is not landing on different objects of perception and creating perceptions in the mind. And if you watch carefully, especially if you can sit with yourself free from thinking, what you find is the conscious attention, in Pali manasikara, in Thai manasikan. Attention moves around from one thing to another thing to another thing. Normally, you relate to yourself as living in the world. The world is a solid, real thing, and me as an actor in it. You have a series of stories through which you relate to the world and guide you. But if you are viewing it without the thinking, what you see actually is your attention moves from one thing to another thing to another thing. For example, if you're in the university this evening and you're going back by the, forgot what you call it, the railway, right? You have the bus, the railway, and the light rail. As you walk to the station, in your mind, in your thinking, that's one thing. You leave the university, you go to the station. But if you're really practicing mindfulness, you find that along the walk, your attention goes to putting on your shoes. Then your attention goes to checking you've got your coat. Then your attention goes to what's your friend doing. Then your attention goes to which way is it? Then your attention goes to the door handle on the door. Then your attention goes to, if you're practicing mindfulness, it breaks up your normal way of interacting with the world. And you're seeing this rapid fire of attention snaking from one thing to a different thing to another thing. This attention snaking around is another level of consciousness. Thinking tries to bring it into, tie it all up into a story. So you give up the thinking, you see this consciousness. So then when it comes to meditation, there is the other school of thinking. I remember I mentioned 3 ideas around this. One is, should you think about things in the world? Secondly, is should you have insight into the nature of thinking by allowing it to be there while you watch it? The third thing is, what happens if you give up this process of attention wandering around, creating objects of perception altogether? And this is what the Buddha was usually talking about when he talked about thoughts. He would say the wholesome thoughts and the unwholesome thoughts both need to stop. The higher states of insight, understanding, and realization in Buddhism, the mystic attainments of the mystic traditions around the world, all come from when you are willing to purify consciousness out of and away from perceiving things. So this mechanism of the attention sneaking out from one object to another object to another object, this has to come to a stop. When this comes to a stop, one might expect the mind to shut down and get what we call the dial tone from God, almost as if it's just like a bzzz. Some people younger than me might not know what a dial tone is. I'm not sure. That's what used to happen. But actually what happens when you purify consciousness in this way and hold it still and unified, is the mind becomes brighter, becomes sharper. You'll feel an energy that comes down through the body. You feel awakening up, awakening. The body may feel very large. It should start to feel pleasant. Now, you will still have aches and pains and discomforts in the body if you put your attention onto them. But in the meditation, you will have a generalized body awareness, and it can appear often as neutral to begin with, but then will become quite invigorated and quite pleasant to be with. If you find this happening, whatever your meditation object is, switch it to this pleasant feeling in the body. Generalized awareness of the body. It's almost like you are here. I think you had Ajahn Sumedho recently, and he would always say, awareness here, here, and he waves his hands around. And so some people aren't quite sure what he's talking about. But as you experience it, you will recognize it. That's why we tell you these things, so that when they come up, you recognize that it's come up. Otherwise, you will just dismiss it as being another thing to observe in meditation or just another state of mind. You should recognize when the mind is attaining in the correct way. You'll notice that the thoughts at that time are long gone. Thinking, concepts, ideas are long gone when you're willing to move the mind into that silent space. Now, there is a trick here. If you imagine silence, or you imagine something that's silence, that is just another concept that you are putting your mind on. So it gets very tricky that the meditator tries to make this experience happen. It won't happen, because the act of trying is throwing up another idea of perception. So you can meditate on stillness and you can make your mind extraordinarily still, but your mind is still captured in a perception. It's just a purified and more still perception. So the feeling that arises is one of like yourself. Don't be afraid of the term non-self. A brightness and an energization that there's no mistaking that, oh yeah, this is not like all other things. This is like the purified stream of consciousness, and it can appear very powerful. You can have a piti, or the rapture, we translate as rapture or joy, can arise, and it can be really beautiful and absorbing. These things happen. Be willing to go into that experience. It means you're attaining in the right way. I've seen, and I've been with many teachers, and when their students have reported these things, they say, no, you're doing it wrong, go back to the breath, start walking meditation, because they have been taught the right way. The mind will attain to an awareness of awareness, or a knowing of itself, independent of objects of perception. Mind, I should say here at this point, is quite withdrawn. It's not out into the world. You're not moving around the shopping center or driving your car. This is what you do in deep sitting meditation. So, should one try to stop the thoughts or not? Nearly always when the Buddha would talk about this, he would say you need to bring an end to the thinking. There are several different words for thinking, but the one I'll focus on is vitakka, or in the Abhidhamma it's called vitakka vichara. Now, vitakka means to throw, and vichara means to circle around. So in the Abhidhamma text, it's called the Abhidhammata Sangaha, if you're interested. But in this text, it says the vitakka is like a bee that sees the flower and will go towards the flower. Vichara is like the bee circling around the flower before it lands. And these are the two words for thinking in the Pali. So thinking has the property that it throws your attention onto something. Like right now, you can pay attention to me, or you can pay attention to your meditation, or you can turn on the news, pay attention to the things that are happening on the news. Then your attention goes towards that thing and hovers around that thing. Like right now, I could bring your attention to Australia being knocked out of the World Cup rugby. Like 5 seconds ago, you weren't thinking about it, you weren't upset about it. But now that I brought your attention to it, I have thrown your attention, vitakka, onto this topic. And now you're like, oh no, how did Australia get knocked out of the Rugby World Cup? Being English, we get very accustomed to our teams losing cricket and football and things like this. So have you noticed that? You bring something up into the mind and then suddenly your mind starts revolving around that thing. And then you can't stop thinking about it. And then suddenly somebody says lunch is ready, and you're like, oh, now that subject is gone. It's completely gone from your mind. It's not causing any of these reactions. And you're thinking about what's in your sandwiches. So notice this. When something isn't called up into perception, at the moment, consider it as not real. It may still exist in the world. If you need to work and behave in the world, then you go ahead and you need to have these kind of constructs. But for a meditator, when it's not there up in the mind, we notice that it's gone. That thing is completely disappeared without remainder. So there is a very famous sutta where the Buddha talks about this, and he gives 5 subjects for 5 ways to control distracting thoughts. And I'm going to switch in a second to the screen. You can see the actual sutta. In this sutta, the first method that the Buddha gives is to change the subject for another subject. So if you are thinking angry thoughts about someone or something, you can change them for nicer thoughts, loving kindness or emptiness, something like that. So you're exchanging one set of thoughts for another set of thoughts that have less attachment. He compared it to a carpenter. Now, in the old days, they didn't have screws and glue and nails like we have today. So when you hold 2 pieces of wood together, you would drill a hole through the 2 pieces of wood, and you would knock a peg through the 2 pieces of wood, and it would hold them together. If you want to repair the furniture, you knock the peg out and you can separate the pieces of wood. So he gave this analogy. It's like a carpenter using a small peg to knock out a larger peg. In that way, you're using a better thought, like loving kindness, to remove a distracting thought like anger. So that's the first method, is to change the subject of the thinking. The next method was to view the drawbacks in that kind of thinking. So again, you may be thinking about something unwholesome, your anger, or you may be caught in greed of like, I really want this thing to happen, or I want this to own this thing. And that's greed thoughts. And so you can look at the unwholesome nature of those thoughts. You see how they condense the mind, how they distract the mind, they distract you from your natural beauty, the natural beauty of your consciousness. When you look at them as unpleasant, which I talked about earlier, you naturally want to give up those thoughts. The analogy the Buddha gives is like a good-looking man or woman who's fond of their appearance. If you were to take a dead dog and drape it across their shoulders, lovely, vivid metaphors that the Buddha uses in the suttas. If you were to drape a dead dog across that person's shoulders, they would feel revulsion and quickly try to throw that dog off their shoulders. In the same way, if you view your thinking as dukkha, very quickly you want to pass to the state of mind that lies beyond thinking. The third method he gave was to forget about that thought. Whatever it is that you're thinking about, well, just forget about it. Don't care about it. So if you're thinking about the rugby, don't. Don't think about it. Then it's not going to upset you. Again, are you shoving your head in the sand? Do you need to think about things in the world? This is a valid question, but for meditation, no. We need to get beyond the thinking mind. So the Buddha said this is like looking away. It is a person who looks at something that they dislike and they look in a different direction. Problem solved. The fourth method was to stop the formation of the thoughts. And if you get very concentrated onto the mind, you can see the thought as it comes up. It's like a tickle, and it always comes from the belly. It's like a tickle, and you know what the thought is going to be before you've thought it. You get this pre-thought thing. If any of you have studied Noam Chomsky in his early stuff before he he went all crazy. In his linguistic stuff, he talked about, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was deep structure. I think that was the word that he used. And it's like the thought that comes up complete in itself before you arrange it into a sentence with syntax. So he would say, you know, the dog bit the elephant complete beforehand. And then you put it into a sentence. And that sentence can be the elephant was bitten by the dog, or the dog bit the elephant, or the elephant and the dog were biting each other, or something like that. Thoughts come up first in this little niggle, this little shaking, before they get verbalized. And you can catch that. If you catch that, it's stopping the formation of the thought. And the Buddha said, this is like a person who is running, they think to themselves, what if I was to walk? And if they're walking, they think, what if I was to walk slowly? If they're walking slowly, they think, what if I was to stand? If they're standing, they think, what if I was to sit? And in this way, you slow down the thinking. The final method, the fifth method, it's worth reading in full because it's quite amusing. If none of those methods work, I'm reading from the sutta, which I'll share for you in a second. With teeth clenched, tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, you squeeze, squash, crush mind with mind. When you succeed in that, the unwholesome thoughts are given up and come to an end. So it's kind of like the brute force and ignorance method of controlling the thoughts. Those are the Buddhist 5 methods. I would give he gave the analogy that this is like a strong man taking hold of a weaker man and throwing him around, moving him, forcing him. These are the Buddhist 5 methods for controlling thoughts. I have a 6th method. If none of those 5 methods work, the 6th method comes from Pandit Bhikkhu. Go to bed. There's nothing left for it. If you really can't control the thoughts and you're done and you're exhausted, then go to bed. Try again another day. Now, I want to finish off, because we're at 45 minutes now. I want to finish off with what this sutta says happens after the 5 methods, or one of the 5 methods, are applied. So take careful note here. The Buddha is saying you stop the thinking. And I want to show you what he said applies when you do this. So I'm going to quickly go to share screen. And you should be able to. Okay. I can see it. So after each of these methods is applied, or any other method that you have that you want to use. For some reason, my computer won't let me shift. So after each of these methods is applied, or any other method that you can use to control the thoughts, their mind becomes stilled internally, settles, unifies, and becomes immersed in samadhi. This is really important. This is not watching your thoughts or getting your insight into thoughts. This is not allowing the thoughts to be there, allow them to come and go. This, your mind becomes still, settled, unified, and immersed in samadhi. So this is called a mendicant, or a monk, or a meditator who is a master of the ways of thought. They will think what they want to think, and they won't think what they don't want to think. Cut off craving, untied the feathers, and by understanding the nature of conceit have made an end to suffering. So this is not just being aware of thinking or getting inside or relaxing and letting go. This is a deeply powerful immersion in samadhi, in concentration that is going on. Yeah. This is the key line. And this line repeats after each of the 5 methods as what should be the result of what happens. So I'm leaving these thoughts, ideas with you, suggestion to use the meditation time specifically, if you can, as a way to understand consciousness, purified consciousness, after the thoughts have stopped, after the nature of the perceiving mind going around finding objects, things to look at, think about, smell, taste, touch, etc. When all of this stops still and you are unified, brought together, one of the words is ekabhava, to literally become one. The mind becomes bright and becomes still. It's very important to know when your mind has become very bright, still, self-aware. You will have this generalized body awareness with it, and you may well have the piti or the rapture that runs through the body, the energization. When this happens, you need to go into that experience. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And what I'll do is I'll put a link to the sutta into the chat, so you can, if you want to look at it or read it in full, or then you can do so. But I'll stop the sharing. And I'll put the link into the chat for everybody. And then you can see it yourself now or later on or whatever. Okay, is there any questions or doubts, or anybody have any good
yes, Bhante.
response to the question about should we be thinking about the things in the world and be engaged in the world?
Yeah. It's a very good question, Bhante, because I must admit it comes up a lot in our discussions. So I invite everyone to maybe have a contemplate, a bit of thinking about Bhante's question and type your responses in the chat. Or if you have any questions related to that question, you can also type in the chat. Or if you have any other questions about the general talk, please also type in the chat, and we have paper and pen in person for you as well. Bhante, we do have some comments as well before we get to those responses in the chat as you're talking. So someone said, while you're talking about being aware of the thought before the thought pops up, we have a comment saying it's the thought your brain proposes before it writhes in agony. And when you were talking about going to sleep, if you think too much, we have someone saying, ha ha ha, then I will always be sleeping. which, you know, I agree with, sort of. If we're going to sleep every time we think, we'll always be sleeping. And we actually have a question. So what is the connection between thoughts and feeling / emotions? Someone commented, brain thinks ugly thought, chemicals react to ugly thought, feelings produced from chemical reaction produced by ugly thought. But Bhante, what is your perspective on that question?
I just, from what you said a second ago, I did come across a meditator on retreat one time, and they were complaining, saying that every time we come to do your meditation, I just fall asleep, your meditation doesn't work. And then at night I go to bed and I can't sleep. They were blaming the teacher, and the teacher had a very good response. He said, when you come to meditate, you should try and sleep. And when you go to bed, you should try and meditate.
That's great.
So I just, because you read quite quickly, I'm going through the chat here. It's the thought your brain proposes right before it arrives in agony. Yes. what is the connection between thoughts and feeling and emotions? So I'm not sure, because I'm a male and I'm English, so I don't really have emotions. And I see a lot of people have feelings about things, and sometimes they come and ask questions, and I just think, well, don't have that problem. And so a lot of the time I don't get it. From my own experience, emotions will come from thinking, but they have a delayed reaction. So if you start thinking negatively, which was my tendency in Buddhism, you have three tendencies. You either focus on things that you like, you focus on things that you dislike, or you focus on things that are neutral. This is lopa, moha, dosa. If you're a dosa person, focus on things that you dislike, then you will tend to be a problem solver. But you will have a tendency towards depression, which is what I had, because I would think of everything that I dislike about the world or people. And then a day later or 2 days later, a week later, I find myself in a depression. And the feelings then are longer feelings. So that depression will last for a week. And I have to be very, very careful with my thinking not to feed it again, because depression has this tendency, it wants to be fed with more negative thoughts. And you have to be very, very careful with that. That was very much my experience. And I still, those of you who've had depression or no depression, you'll probably be a depressive your whole life. So you'll be like a sober alcoholic, like an alcoholic knows that alcohol is going to destroy them. So a depressive should know you have to be really careful with your thoughts, and you have to do it your whole life. The good news is, if you are careful with your thoughts, the depression can disappear and you can gain power over it. So in my experience, the thoughts come first and they create an emotion or feelings. Then the emotion will fuel further thoughts about that thing. So you think about something and then you want it. And because you want it, you start thinking about it more. But I've never had any success dealing with feelings or even knowing that I have feelings. So I've always focused on the thinking part is the most crucial. Yeah. So what was the next thing?
Yeah, as you actually saying that, we have some comments regarding depression, negative thoughts. Someone said, I have a family in one of the war zones. It's hard to think nice thoughts about the world. And related to that, somebody asked the question, yes, depression is a huge topic. So how do we reprogram these negative thoughts?
Well, as I just said, in negative thinking, use the dead dog method. When the negative thoughts come up, you need that bravery to know this thought is coming up and is going to destroy me, because it feels real. It feels like so enticing. Like yesterday, I was looking at these 14, 15-year-old boys dancing in Palestine about the attacks they made on Israel. And it breaks my heart to see that. And this is why I was asking the question this week, is like, well, at what point do we let go of thoughts, and at what point do we say we have to engage in the world? However, if you let that come in to the mind, then it's going to arouse those ugly feelings. And you have to be really, really careful about this. In order to be, as the sutta just said, you can read it for yourself, to become a master in the ways of thought. So you need to remind yourself, no, the ugly thoughts and the ugly things are not going to help anybody. If you only think nice thoughts about nice people, you're not going to succeed in the holy life. Do you remember I don't know if I'm allowed, but a little bit of Christianity. Do you remember Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and he says you should love those who love you. This is what he said. The text says you should love those who love you, but don't even the tax collectors love those who love them? I say to you, you should love those who hate you. Just as the sun will shine on the good and the evil, and the rain will fall on the just and the unjust, so I say to you, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I'm no Bible expert. I know like about 5 quotes from the Bible, and that's one of them. So, but that was like just so beautifully put that it takes a real bravery not to fall into the hating or not to fall into the greed, because it feels so enticing to do so. So that is our task, and that's what we have to do, to somehow find that response of metta. I'll tell you one thing that I didn't really understand until I've been a monk for 25 years. If you know the state of mind that is self-knowing, self-aware and energized, it's still, but it's not caught in an object. It's not dull. It's not empty. This luminosity of the mind will start to reveal itself, and you should know it when it happens. If you know that, you have a refuge, because all the stuff that happens in the world, when you can touch on this, there is no good or evil. There is no bright or dark karma. It is perfect. And it gives you the insight that God's plan is right for the whole world, even though it doesn't appear that way. And because you have a refuge to go to, it stops you from trying to work out the world. Otherwise, you try and work it out. Well, what is the correct response? What should I be thinking? Who should I be supporting? But then you know the thing that is like completely other than that. And you're like, oh, that's right. That's right. It's, and that's why the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The sun shines on the good and the evil alike. So it is useful to know that refuge, to know that other than all the stuff of the mind. And then you have this confidence that actually there is a perfection of creation. I don't know if I'm putting that across correctly. By the way, there was an amusing poem by Ogden Nash, I think his name was, and he talked about this statement in the Bible of knowing, of the sun shining on the good and the bad and the rain falling on the just and the unjust. And his poem went like this: the rain, it falls on the just and the unjust fella, but more it falls on the just because the unjust stole the just's umbrella.
I love hearing about intersectionalities of religion, and there's actually a lot of them. But on the topic of a bright mind, Bhante, that you mentioned, we have a question on if we forcefully stop thoughts, will we still experience samadhi?
No, if you forcefully stop thoughts, the act of force is an action of the mind, and an action of the mind is to latch onto a perception rather than another perception. So if I try to stop thoughts, the only way that I can do that by action, by effort, is by focusing my mind on some other thing. So I can focus on the breath, I can focus on a perception, I can focus on a physical feeling, any meditation object. That's forcing your mind to stop thinking. But if your mind stops without an object, it becomes self-knowing and self-aware. That you can concentrate on because you just are it. You're not doing something, you just are it. And it's a luminosity that arises or reveals itself by itself. And this is why somewhat in Zen, but also in Tibetan, they say that you are already enlightened. The point is that this luminosity will reveal itself naturally when you get out the way. So you don't have to purify. You don't become a Buddha by purifying and having the most beautiful thoughts and the most perfect actions. That's the long way around. That will take you thousands of lifetimes. And the Buddha never recommended that path. No, so the luminosity will arise by itself when you get out of the way. And so you won't do it by force. On the other hand, the Buddha continually recommended jhana meditation, concentration meditation. In sutta after sutta after sutta, throughout the texts, the Buddha says you should practice concentration meditation. Sariputta, the Buddha's foremost disciple for insight and wisdom, according to the commentaries, he was a jhana meditator. He practiced jhana concentration meditation. And his enlightenment came that he would enter into concentration and then exit, and then enter and then exit, enter and exit. And as he exits the concentration, he will see this whole self kind of explode into being. And it was seeing that got him enlightened. So even the Buddha's foremost wisdom disciple was practicing concentration meditation. So definitely you should know how to do it. But please note that the luminosity that arises, this comes not from focusing on an object.
And Bhante, what you talked about, nibbana and perception is very relevant also for our next question, which is, it is often said that jhanas is the springboard to nibbana. Bhante, one thing you mentioned that is even the perception of space is limiting the mind. And so as you said yourself, your own perception of self and your own perception of everything. Is it true? It is true, but shouldn't we master these perceptions before we let them go so we don't bypass the gradual process of samadhi?
I can't honestly say that method A is right and method B is wrong. It does depend on you. The Buddha's own disciples had different methods. Moggallana, the Buddha's foremost disciple, he was pure samadhi, concentration. Sariputta was samatha vipassana, so he would do both concentration and the vipassana, as I mentioned. Anuruddha, the Buddha's cousin, used psychic powers to gain enlightenment. So Ananda used his what we would call karma yoga, or the giving, that he was the Buddha's attendant for so long. So you can't say that one way is the right way and one way is the wrong way. And what happens is, if you ask teachers that, they will come out with what they do. If you ask any teacher, like, what's the right way? Well, the right way is the way I do it. And that's not true. And I've seen so many people do this. The trouble is, if you ask a question, of course, they're going to give an answer, but their answer is going to be highly specific to them. From my own experience, I'll tell you, you will have to do concentration meditation. There is a text, there is one sutta that says some monks practice concentration, and gain liberation. Some practice insight and gain liberation. Some practice insight and concentration and gain liberation. But some people don't practice either concentration or insight. But at some point, their minds become unified and they gain liberation. So I think we have to open up to the possibility that maybe each of us has our own way. But be assured, even in all four of those instances, even the last instance, that monk's mind attained to unification, the unification of mind. That has to happen. That's the only doorway to deathless. So my recommendation is you should follow a teacher who who you relate to, but keep investigating, keep reading other texts. I love to read. Right now I'm reading some Zen texts. Beautiful. So yeah, find your own way.
That's great advice, Bhante, because no one knows our own minds other than ourselves the best. So we have other questions in two broad topics. One is more questions about thoughts, and the other ones are about what we talked about, which is engaging the world versus letting go of thoughts. So on the topic of thoughts, we have a question on the Buddha is proposing that it is better to suppress the thought than to indulge in it, question mark, counterintuitive. How about letting it be or letting it go? And I think that's in response to some of your talks about ways to deal with our thoughts.
Right. So when we practice mindfulness of thoughts, i.e. we allow the thoughts to be there, the only reason to do this is to gain insight into the nature of thinking. And the insight is that these thoughts come and go and oppress us. And that's the feeling that you get when you're trying to meditate and the thoughts keep coming. That the thoughts are not real, that they're not yourself. And to gain that confidence, to not believe you're thinking. But the only reason we're doing this is so that we can step beyond thinking. You cannot just keep remaining in the world of trying to get insights into your thoughts. The insights are there for a reason, and the reason is to step outside of the thinking mind and to move into these super mundane states of mind. Very important. Otherwise, you will always be trapped in that prison cell. Remember, the analogy is like a prison, somebody locked in a prison, and you slide them the key under the door, and they hang the key on the wall and worship it. And they don't use the key to get out of the cell. In the same way, if you just keep trying to be aware of thoughts and getting insights into them, you're not using the insight to escape the cell. What lies beyond thoughts when the mind unifies and comes together? Look up that sutta that I said. The mind becomes still internally, becomes unified, bright, steady, powerful. All these words that the Buddha used. That's the thing that will enable us to become enlightened, to step beyond. Otherwise, you're just staying in the world of the mundane. So I'm absolutely insistent. You have to be able to step beyond the world of thinking. However, mindfulness of thinking is very powerful, that it gives you an insight into the nature of your thinking. And most importantly, it gives you an empowerment in a choice of when you react to things. So that's why it's really useful practice.
Yeah, great. And on the topic of thought, we also have another question, which is very interesting. Can one tell already if the thought before the thought is wholesome/unwholesome? And I think that's in response to what you said about when before a thought arises, often we already know the thought before we know it in full sentence.
Right. So the part of the Eightfold Path is called right effort. And right effort is to know wholesome states of mind when they arise and encourage them. To know wholesome states of mind that haven't arisen and to cause them to arise. To note unwholesome states that have arisen and to abandon them. And unwholesome states that haven't arisen to prevent them. So these are the 4 right efforts. If you didn't catch all of that in sequence, just look up 4 right efforts. This is a very specific, exact, short, clear formula. So if you are no longer attention outside and your attention is internally to your actions and reactions, then you should be able to distinguish between wholesome and unwholesome and know which one that you are doing. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I love the linkage to the 4 right efforts, very key in meditation and everyday living. And we also have a comment on the thought. So someone said, I've started reading out loud. It's really soothing and relaxing and distracting from thoughts. So I guess that's another method. And then on the topic then about engaging the world, we have a question that's asking, as you said, the Israel-Palestine question is one that many may wrestle with. What do you think the Buddha would say?
Yeah, I kind of don't like that, because so many times I've seen teachers come out and say things, and you're like, no, the Buddha would never have said that. And it's almost like, well, this is what the Buddhas would have said if he was as intelligent as I am. And then they give their own opinion about something. So there was I don't know what the Buddha would say about that, but there was very briefly, there was the conflict in his time that Kosala and the Sakyan kingdom were on two sides, opposite sides of a river, and the river was drying up. So they came into conflict over the water rights, who had the right to the water. And the two armies came to clash, and the Buddha sat between them. And then both armies, because both of them respected the Buddha, he taught in both of the cities, and then they separated. Later on, at the end of his life, the Kolan kingdom, forget the name right, led by Ajata Satu, came to attack the Sakyan kingdom. And again, the Buddha sat between the two armies, and the two armies separated without fighting. And the next day they came to fight, and he sat between them. And he sat between the two armies 3 times. And 3 times the armies separated and didn't fight. And the 4th day, Ajatasattu still came to attack the Sakyan kingdom, and the Buddha left. There's nothing more he could do. And he left the two armies to fight and hit the Sakyan kingdom. His own kingdom was utterly destroyed, and the city was razed to the ground. So even at the time of the Buddha, there's only so much the Buddha could do, that in the end, he just had to say, well, everybody's going to suffer, going to die. So it is telling that make what you want of that story in relation to the modern day. I can't tell you, but that's the story that comes from the suttas.
And Bhante, with that story, this is Tina here, isn't there also the explanation that there was also a karmic connection between the two kingdoms and the Sakyans previously, that this was also something that they had done? And so in some ways that the Buddha had to let the karmic conditions to take its place.
Yeah, that's what the commentaries say, or the sub-commentaries. It feels to me like sometimes we want to make everything perfect, and when it isn't perfect, we say, well, somehow karma is making it perfect. And they do this in Christianity. They want to say, well, God's plan is mysterious, but I'm sure he has a plan. And it feels to me like a kind of a dismissal that, well, it might seem like everything's wrong, but actually everything's right. And I'm not sure that I just think bad things happen sometimes, and we don't have a satisfactory explanation for it. So that comment that you made is correct. That's in the sub-commentaries. That's how they explain that event. They say, well, there was a karma and it needed to play itself out.
Yeah, that's a reminder of us to practice equanimity, where we can do as much as we can, but there are karmic forces that sometimes we just cannot do as much about. On that topic of Brahma Viharas, which equanimity is a part of, we also have a comment which takes the perspective of metta, which is, I'm guessing a comment, a guess at what the Buddha would say is, hatred is never overcome with hatred, it's only overcome with love. That's what made me smile a little bit. It's beautiful. And then we also have, I think it's a comment, perhaps one take about engaging the world is what the Buddha recommended in the Metta Sutta, where the ideal is cherishing all beings like a mother her children. And a mother will usually try to take action to help her children, especially when we can actually make some positive difference.
Yeah, it's funny, the Metta Sutta was actually given when the monks had gone to a forest grove and they couldn't meditate and are having really trouble concentrating their minds. And they went to the Buddha and complained. And the Buddha said, the devas in the trees around you don't like you. So he gave them the Metta Sutta so that they should chant this Metta Sutta to the devas, so the devas would let them meditate. So that was the context of the Metta Sutta. Note that metta is different to the luminosity of mind that I was talking about. Metta is a specific state of mind that you call into being. And the more often you call it into the being, the more easy that state of mind is to arise. So this is a different practice to an emptiness practice. This is one that an active participation that we are making with ourselves and other people and in the world. I didn't really understand metta for a long time until I associated it with that line that I mentioned in the Bible, that God's sun, God causes the sun to shine on the good and the evil. And that's how metta feels with me, is it's non-judgmental. And it's not saying, well, I'll have metta for you, even though you're an evil person. It's like, no, it's just metta. And like this good and evil stuff doesn't belong to the, to the higher realm. So that's how I like to think of metta, is God bringing the rain on the just and the unjust alike. Is metta shines in that way. But that's an active way that we train the mind into a particular states of mind and that we can use to interact. Yeah.
Beautiful. That is a beautiful end to our session today. I think we've run through everyone's questions. We have lots of thank yous from everyone. So before we close off, Bhante, would you like to do a dedication of notes, please? Bye.
Yeah, I just read in the suttas that Muninda Raji was the one who said you should beat the person, sum up all your metta and beat the person with an umbrella. I think that's right. It was him. Sabhitiyo vivajantu sabharogo satumate bhavatwantarayo sukhi degayuko bhava abhiva dhanasili sanichang buddha pachayino chataro dhamma vadanti ayuvano sukhang balang. And I just mention quickly that I will be in the Vajrasala, Southern Highlands. We'll be doing a long weekend retreat. I think it's an Easter retreat in April, end of April next year. So anybody who would like to join me or engage a bit more in some of this meditation I was talking about, April next year, we'll be in the Association of Engaged Buddhists website in due course.
Thanks, Bhante. And actually, the association has contacted us at Mesa Centre as well and asked if we wanted to work together for something next year as well when you're visiting. So it'll be great if you could join for that too.
Yeah, as soon as we get the dates out, I'm always happy. You can stack things up like every day. I don't mind. Like 2 or 3 events a day. I don't mind.
I know, you're just so gung-ho. It's great. Actually, Bhante, I realized we didn't quite answer the question that you raised earlier. You know how you put forward that scenario about, for example, if someone was stealing something, do we lock the doors? What are those things? Is that considered attachments or that kind of question? It reminds me of something that I think it was in the Jataka tales, where back then when the Buddha was the Bodhisattva and he was on a ship. You may know this story, and there was a pirate who comes on and wants to kill the 500 who were on board. Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah, but go on, you're remembering it better than me.
And the way that it was retold was that he had a choice either to kill the pirate and then save the 500 people, or to not kill the pirate so that he can keep that precept of not killing. And he decided to actually kill the pirate, and he killed the pirate, and his explanation was it was out of pure compassion to save the 500 people, and also to save the pirate from the negative karmic consequences if that pirate had gone ahead and killed those 500 people. So you're quite right, things aren't black and white, and very often in samsara we have to make these choices that are quite grey, but it's the intention, and his intention was to save not only the 500 people but also the pirates. So perhaps the monastics and the monks who did actually lock their kutis, it's also potentially to mean that any people who would come and think about stealing, that they wouldn't be able to then cause that negative karmic act. So it's out of compassion for the thieves as well that they lock their kutis.
Yeah.
That was a great addition. Thank you, Tina. I have a lot of moral dilemmas like this every day, so it's great to know there's room for grey areas.
Hopefully not about killing.
Thank God it's not about killing. So I just want to finish with a big thank you to you, Bhante, for this jam-packed talk. I felt like we covered so much awesome content. Yeah, like really, like from all the ways to deal with our thoughts, as well as practicing jhana, as well as how do we engage with the world versus not. I hope that this was also really great talk for everyone here. I hope that you've had the chance to ask your questions and be able to interact with us. And yeah, really grateful for your presence here and for joining us here as well. I didn't get to read all the comments, but it's just short of time, and it's probably not a good opportunity, like we've already missed the chance. But yeah, so sorry if I missed your comment as well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining tonight, and thank you, Bhante, again for coming to our Saving Grace tonight. Before we close off, we just have a few announcements as well. So on Mondays we have free meditation online and in person at 6:30. Tuesdays we have free yoga in person, and on Wednesdays we have Wisdom Wednesdays at 7 to 8:30. We also have a few events coming up, a few retreats actually. So we've got a 9-day natural samadhi retreat, which is going to be a metta retreat. So if you like metta, which we talked about today, you're very welcome to come to this retreat. It will be in November. And if you can't come for the full 9 days, you can also come just for the weekends. We've made that available for everyone in case if you're busy and you just want to come for the weekend practice. And during the week, you're able to practice by yourself at home. And then we also have a day retreat, which is a koan meditation from 9 to 4. So with this master that we are very lucky to have teaching, he's gonna speak in Korean, but we'll have an interpreter to come and translate. I think in koan meditation, not everyone's allowed to teach. You can only teach if you're able, yeah, I guess you're licensed or you're permitted to teach. So this master is that true? No, I thought I read that somewhere. Okay, so but anyway, I think it'll be a really interesting meditation because we don't get to do much koan meditation nowadays. So yeah, please feel free to join us. We'll be in the Blue Mountains. We'll be in a beautiful space as well. And then we also have Meta Connections coming up. We have Meta Connections Initiative. So it's a network established to support lay Buddhists with their practice of right livelihood and connects them with the Buddhist temples and organizations. So if you have certain skills you would like to offer, you can sign up as an individual. If you have a business organization or a temple you're supporting, we encourage you to also sign up as an organization and post your projects. So the individuals that would like to volunteer or get pro bono paid work, they could contact you for those projects. Yeah, and I think that's all the announcements we have for today. We also finished up our Metta Convention week last week, and we've had how many attendees? Like max maybe a lot, yeah, in person, online. So yeah, we'll have those videos as well as photos uploaded online if you'd like to see them after. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thanks everyone.